Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling, well, quite a challenge you've set us, navigating the murky waters of Ondo cryptocurrency price predictions. That's ticker ONDO.
Right, and we've got forecasts stretching way, way out, even to 2050.
Exactly. So our mission here is to really pull out the key potential price moves, the ranges, across these different analyses, hopefully giving you a clearer idea of what the future might hold.
Yeah, and I think it's crucial, before we really jump in, to state the obvious. Predicting crypto prices, especially that far out, it's inherently uncertain, very dynamic space.
Oh, absolutely.
But what we can do is explore the scenarios. These forecasts, they're based on certain methods, certain data, so we look at the potential futures they suggest.
Think of it like mapping out possible roads, maybe. Not declaring the destination. This will break it down. Near term, first rest of 2025, 2026. Then midterm, say 2030, 2035, 2040. And finally, those really long range ones, 2045, 2050. Sound good?
Sounds like a plan. Where are we right now with Ondo?
Good question. Okay, current snapshot. It's trading around 95 cents. We saw specific figures like 0.9541 suns from one source, 0.9553 from another. Pretty close.
And interestingly, both sources are showing some recent positive movement, right?
Yeah, exactly. One had like plus 3.17% in 24 hours, plus 3.42% over the week. The other was similar, plus 3.07% daily, and plus 0.78% weekly. So little bumps up recently.
Okay, good context. So the immediate future then, what are analysts thinking for the rest of this year, 2025?
Well, one source using technical analysis describes the short-term sentiment as bullish.
Okay, bullish. What does that mean in practice? Any key levels?
Yeah, they point to a key resistance level. Think of that like a ceiling at $1.04, and support the floor down at about 0.9167.
Right, so prices have struggled to get past $1.04, but tend to bounce off $1.91.
Exactly. And they suggest that a solid break above that $1.04 ceiling could, open the door for a move towards $1.17.
Interesting. Okay, so that's a technical picture. What about actual price predictions for the rest of 2025? Are they all aligned?
Not exactly. This is where you start seeing some daylight between the forecasts.
As expected, maybe. What kind of range are we talking?
Well, one forecast sees a potential peak this year at $2.01, but also a low of 0.6646. The average they give is around $1.16.
Okay, so quite a wide potential swing there. What about the other source?
A bit tighter, maybe. They predict a year-end maximum of $2.11, so similar high, but a minimum of $1.35.
So a higher floor in that prediction. Both seeing growth potential, but differing on the downside risk, it seems.
Yeah. And one of the sources gave us a really granular look, month by month, for the rest of 25. Anything jump out there?
Yeah, looking at those monthlies, October stands out. That's where that $2.01 peak prediction comes in. But then, interestingly, the average forecast for December dips back down to $1.16.
So not just a straight line up, even within the year. That volatility seems baked in.
Absolutely. It really highlights how dynamic things could be, even just over the next 6-7 months.
And we also had an even shorter term view, didn't we? Like a 10-day forecast.
We did, yeah. That crystal ball gazing, very near term, suggests a trading range between roughly 90 cents and $1.08 over the next 10 days.
Okay.
And specifically, the prediction for tomorrow, May 27th, was actually around 0.90 cents.
90 cents. So that implies maybe a little dip, right, before any potential climb later in the year.
Could be. It gives that very close-up perspective, maybe suggesting some caution right now before those potentially higher numbers later on.
Right. And just to cap off 2025, one source put a number on it, predicting a plus 21.46% increase by year end, landing around that $1.16 mark.
Which, lines up with the lower end of the ranges we saw, but still a pretty decent predicted increase from where we are now.
Definitely. It raises that interesting question for you, the listener. You see these very short-term daily predictions than the year-end ones. How do you weigh those different signals?
Yeah, something to consider. Okay, should we turn the page? Look at 2026.
Let's do it. What's the outlook for the year after next?
Well, one source keeps that bullish tone going. They're predicting a range between $0.67 and $2.34 for 2026. Okay.
And they have a year-end target of $1.98, so still pretty optimistic in their model.
But the second source, still bullish or?
More tempered, I'd say.
Yeah.
For 2026, they gave a maximum of $1.61 and a minimum of $1.35.
Okay. So both still predicting potential growth compared to now, but maybe not as explosive in that second forecast compared to the first one, or even compared to the 2025 highs.
Exactly. Still potentially positive, but perhaps, tapping the brakes a bit according to that second analysis.
And we've got monthly breakdowns again for 2026 from one source, right? Any particular standouts there?
Looking at those, April 2026 shows a really wide potential range, from a low of $1.18 all the way up to a possible high of $2.34.
Ah, that's a big spread within 1 month.
It really emphasizes that volatility isn't expected to disappear. Even within an annual forecast, you could see major swings, peaks and valleys.
Definitely paints that picture. Okay, let's search the timeline now. Midterm, say 2027 out to 2040. Did the predictions start to converge, or do they just spread out even more? Generally, yeah, they spread out more. Increasing divergence, it's just natural, right? The further out you look, the more variables come into play, the harder it is to be precise.
Makes sense. So 2027, what are we seeing?
Okay, for 2027, Source 1 gives a range of about $0.67 up to $2.54, average around 0.80 cents.
80 cents average. That's actually lower than some of the 2025, 2026 predictions.
It is, yeah. But then look at the other source for 2027. Starkly different. They predict an average of just 0.2925.
29 cents.
Yeah, with a minimum of $1.50. Wait, that doesn't quite add up, does it? Let me recheck that. Apologies. The source states an average of 0.292925. A minimum of $1.50 is odd. Perhaps that minimum refers to a different metric or time frame in their report. The key point is the average is very low, $0.29, and they didn't provide a maximum for that specific average figure. It's a really significant difference.
Wow, yeah. That's a huge gap in outlooks for the same year, just a few years out. What could cause such a contrast?
It highlights a fundamental disagreement in their underlying models, probably. Maybe one model weighs potential regulations or tech disruptions much more heavily than the other. For you listening, that kind of divergence is really important to note. It just screams uncertainty for that period.
Understatement. Okay, moving on. 2028. Does it get any clearer?
A little, perhaps. One source predicts a range of roughly $0.74 to $3.06, closing the year around $2.35.
Okay.
The other estimates a higher average, $2.74, with a minimum of $1.19. So still different, but the averages maybe aren't quite as worlds apart as for 2027.
Right. And then 2029.
Source 1, range $7.68 to $3.59, average $2.37. Source 2, much more optimistic again, average $5.82, minimum $2.15.
So that trend of significant divergence is definitely continuing.
Seems so, yeah.
Okay, let's jump to a year many people focus on, 2030. Turn the next decade, what are the long-range seers saying?
Right, 2030. One source forecasts a range from about 62 cents up to $4.20. They expect it to close the year near the top of that, around $4.07.
Okay, $4. And the other?
They suggest an average of $4.88, so a bit higher average, with a minimum of $1.18.
Interesting. So despite the differences in ranges and averages, both are pointing towards potential for pretty substantial growth from today's price by 2030.
Yeah, that's a key point. Even with the variations, the general direction in these midterm forecasts seems upwards.
Okay. Further out still, 2035.
By 2035, Source 1 projects $1.37 to $6.14, but with an average down at $1.54.
Whoa. Average back down again.
Yeah, in that particular forecast. The other source gives a range of $2 to $6.88 for 2035. So both still see Ondo potentially in a significantly higher price bracket, but that average difference is notable.
It really is fascinating how these models can spit out such different results. Do we know why? Like what factors they might be emphasizing differently?
The sources don't always detail the exact weighting in their models, unfortunately. It could be assumptions about adoption rates, competition, overall market cycles, regulatory environments. Lots of possibilities.
Right, the black box problem sometimes. Okay, reaching the end of the midterm view, 2040.
And here, the ranges get really wide. Source 1 gives a low of just 0.09254, like 9 cents, all the way to a high of $9.34.
9 cents to over $9.
Yep, with an average of $4.38. But then the other source for 2040, way more bullish. Their range is $6.85 to $18.16.
$18, the uncertainty just explodes, doesn't it?
Completely. It's like predicting the weather, like you said earlier, predicting tomorrow, okay?
Yeah.
Predicting 15 years from now. So many more variables, a forecast becomes this huge range of possibilities.
That subdime low prediction in one of them really hammers that home. Okay, let's do it. Let's venture into the really long term, 2045, 2050.
This has got to be peak speculation, right? Pure shot in the dark territory.
Pretty much. You absolutely have to view these with extreme caution. Highly speculative.
Understood. So 2045.
One source predicts a massive range. Low of about 3 cents, down to 3.158 cents. High of $12.35.
3 cents to over $12. Okay, what's the average?
The average they give for 2045 is $9.81. 9.81 average. So despite the tiny low, the average suggests huge potential growth over that very long term. If their assumptions hold.
Exactly. But then look at 2050 from the same source.
Okay. What happens? Does it go to the moon?
Actually, no. The range is 47 cents to $12.22, so the high end is similar to 2045, but the average predicted price drops a lot, down to just $0.5031.
50 cents average. After being almost $10 average just 5 years earlier in their forecast.
Yep. It's a really curious decrease in the average within the same analysis. It highlights how unforeseen factors could completely reshape things that far out. Maybe they factor in some kind of market saturation or a competing technology emerging. Who knows?
Wow. That's definitely something to wrap your head around. Okay, so all these numbers, all these predictions, they're not just pulled out of thin air, right? What are the analysts actually looking at? What factors influence these forecasts?
Right, they're based on various things. The sources mention statistical methods looking at historical price data naturally. Also, increasingly, AI and machine learning algorithms trying to spot patterns.
Okay.
Then there's technical analysis studying charts, volume, using indicators like RSI, relative strength index, to see if it's overbought or oversold. MACD moving average divergence for trend direction, momentum, and Fibonacci levels for potential support and resistance.
Standard technical toolkit. What else?
Beyond the charts, they also consider overall market sentiment, just the general vibe among investors, and potential big market events like future bull runs. One source specifically mentioned a potential bull market influencing their 2025 forecast.
Makes sense. And this feels like the big but.
The big but is always the inherent nature of crypto, isn't it? Volatility, uncertainty. These aren't just possibilities. They're basically constants you have to expect.
Absolutely crucial for you to remember that.
Precisely. All these predictions, they're based on today's data, today's methods. The actual future price of a DAO could be significantly different, higher, lower, who knows? Unpredictable events, tech changes, market shifts, they can all throw forecasts off.
Okay, so we've dived deep into this mountain of predictions. If you had to boil it down, what's the big picture takeaway for someone trying to make sense of Ondo's future based on this?
I think the main takeaway is, look, there's a huge spectrum of possibilities here, a lot of variation between forecasts. But a significant number of these analyses do suggest potential for, substantial price growth for Ondo in the coming years, particularly in that midterm window, maybe 2030 to 2040.
Okay, potential upside noted.
But you absolutely have to acknowledge the forecast showing potential dips and those incredibly wide ranges, especially the further out you look.
So potential for gains, yes, but definitely not a smooth, guaranteed ride up. And the crystal ball gets much, much fuzzier further down the road.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And again, this is just one snapshot based on the sources we looked at today.
Absolutely. Consider these insights just one piece of the puzzle. It's so important, vital really, for you to do your own research. DYOR, as they say. Look at lots of sources, different perspectives before making any decisions.
Exactly.
All right. And just to leave you something to chew on. We saw these wildly contrasting predictions today, didn't we? Especially long term. So what fundamental shifts, think big picture in the whole crypto market, or specific things for Ondo, its tech, adoption, partnerships, what would really need to happen for either those super optimistic high predictions or those really pessimistic low ones to actually become a reality way out in 2040 or 2050?
That's a great question to ponder. What are the real catalysts or roadblocks?
Definitely something to think about as you continue your own research. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.